Hi guys. Anyway, this is my presentation. So the book that I read was Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. Um, is really, really interesting book, and I'll tell you why. So here are a couple facts. Annie Dillard was 27 when she wrote Pilgrim of Tinker Creek. It was published in 1974, and it was her first big success for a book. She had written a book called Tickets for a Prayer Wheel, which was just a volume of poetry, but this really started her career as a writer. Um, Annie Dillard said this about Pilgrim. She said, "It's a young writer's book in its excited eloquence and its metaphysical boldness." So basically, she got the idea when she was camping in Acadia National Park in 1972, and she read a book by Edwin Muir, who it's a nature book, and she was intrigued by it. I was like, oh, maybe I want to start writing nature. So she decided she did. So she went back home and filled out a bunch of 5x7 note cards with like literally everything she could remember from reading and writing, like reading and observing everything in nature. So then she decided to write the book. And she had a little bit of trouble because she didn't really want to go by the season, like putting them together in like spring, fall, summer, all that kind of stuff. But that was just the way it kind of played out. However, you really don't notice that too much when you're reading it because she doesn't focus on that as a way of organizing it, which I think makes it a lot better because she does that really, really well. So what's really interesting is this book is structured between two concepts: via positiva, it's Latin. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering it, and via negativa. Um, Basically, this book is full of a bunch of concepts of philosophy, math, science, and theology. Some technology is in there. Like nature is the basis, but she uses that as a way to like explore all these different topics, which was really cool. So via positiva refers to God as omnipotent, omniscient, and all of the positive attributes of that. So it's very positive, obviously. Via negativa stresses God's unknowability. Um, so it's kind of a lot more questioning, like what's up with that. And she poses these through several questions that she talks about. The first part of the book centers around the world and God's goodness. So it's very positive. She's explaining things. Um, I mean, still has some gross content in it. I'll get to that later. Um, but um, but she actually almost stopped writing after that because she couldn't deal with the positivity. She didn't know how to deal with that. Um, it was really hard for her to write. Um, the middle of the beginning of the book, starting with chapter seeing and then intricacy, both have to deal with the via positiva, and then flood is the middle of the book, and it doesn't really conform to either the positive or the negative. Um, it's just kind of there as a connecting thing. And then the via negativa starts with fecundity, which is actually the dark side of intricacy. So what she does is each side of the book has a counter element. So like the positive has a counter element with the negative, which is really, really cool. So then the chapter northing is the counterpart to the chapter seeing in the beginning. So that's really, really interesting. It's also really interesting because she collected all of the bits of the previous paragraphs that like she hadn't, or the previous chapters that she hadn't got into it, and she was like, okay, I'm just gonna write them all down in the chapter called Northing. And so she said, it's now or never for these best bits. So exultant, starved, delirious on caffeine, I threw them all in. And I just thought that was really funny because, I don't know, as a college student, I can relate to that, especially the delirious on caffeine, but, whatever. She did say that she later regretted naming the chapters in a 19th century style because then people started calling it a book of essays, which it isn't. And somehow, because of that, she ends up like she's known as an essayist, which she's not. She's written like one book of essays, so that's kind of interesting about her. I don't know. I think that kind of makes her upset sometimes. At least it did in the afterward I was reading and stuff. Commentary reviewer said this about Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. One of the most pleasing traits of the book is the graceful harmony between scrutiny of real phenomena, and the reflections to which that gives rise. So that that really pretty much sums up the book. Because Annie wrote this book when she was living on Tinker Creek in Virginia's Roanoke Valley. And so she's living in this little house, not quite in the wilderness, but near enough to woods and fields where she goes and explores for like an entire year. And she does have neighbors, and she mentions them a few times in the book, but this is just really interesting. And she said that observing the natural world, taking notes, and reading voluminously in a wide variety of disciplines, including theology, philosophy, natural science, and physics. Pilgrim probes the cosmic significance of the beauty and violence coexisting in the natural world. Which basically is what it is, because it starts out talking about all the positive attributes, and then it also talks about the negative attributes, because you have like really in-depth things that happen with bugs eating other bugs and parasites, and I mean it gets graphic in some parts. That was the only thing I didn't like about this book. Anyway, to orient before I go off on a tangent. So the book is written in a very stream of consciousness style. Each section has specific topics, from seeing, starting with the tomcat and the water bug eating the frog. It's really weird. He like attaches to the frog and like totally sucks him dry. It's gross and disgusting and weird. I don't know. I just couldn't deal with all of it. Basically, each section focuses on a topic, but you're not quite sure what exactly that is until she's done with the chapter, because it's very stream of consciousness. She'll be talking about muskrats at one point, and then she's talking about floods, and then she's talking about bugs, and then muskrats again. So that got a little confusing in some parts, but it's also really, really cool, especially for a nature essay. She also backs up all of her questions with scientific fact, if she has that. Like, she literally, down to the numbers of, like, the estimation of how many bugs are under a specific tree at a specific time. Like, that's how much research she put into it, which was, like, crazy cool, especially because it's kind of the stuff that we were learning about in class as well. Because a lot of this did actually follow what we learned in class about nature writing, and balancing talking about nature and describing it, and describing stories that we have found in nature, to what doing research about nature and stuff, which is really cool. One of my favorite parts of the book is when she's describing an out-of-body experience that she has with nature when she is petting a dog. Personally, because I've had that experience before, and I really love it. And one of my favorite lines in this section is, consciousness itself does not hinder living in the present. In fact, it is only to a heightened awareness that the great door to the present opens at all. Which I think is really, really cool, especially as writers. We tend to have those out-of-body experiences sometimes where we're just be focusing on writing, or just be walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, whoa. And this feeling of, wow, I'm almost above the world looking down and not actually like in the world. And I think honestly that's really a turning point for her in this story, because she really starts to appreciate nature a lot more. I mean, she started out appreciating nature, but she really starts to appreciate it a lot more after that. And then here's another quote that she says. She says, self-consciousness, however, does hinder the experience of the present. It is the one instrument that unplugs all the rest. That's one of my favorite parts of nature writing, is actually being there and actually experiencing nature. and just sitting there taking it all in. And I think that's what I appreciate about this book, because even though there were parts where I was like, ew, that's gross, stop talking about like worms and parasitic wasps on caterpillars, which, by the way, freaking creepy. And I refused to pick tomatoes after I found some on our tomato plants when I was a kid. Yeah. So like, even besides all of those, like, she really describes nature in a beautiful way. She describes like the birds and the snakes and the muskrats, and like how she learned to stalk from a muskrat. Like, she literally spent hours making like no movements just so that she could watch this muskrat. Like, this is like so cool to me. Um, I mean, now I just really want to see a muskrat. One of my other favorite parts is when she's talking about how she's looking at a bird, and then she gets tired of looking at that bird in a particular way, so then she finds another angle to look at it from. Like, maybe she's focusing on the beak, and then she decides to focus on the feathers. And I think that that's really cool, because she tries to renew her interest in nature. She tries to renew her feelings through that, and like her thought processes. And I like that, and I like how that could translate into like life in general, because sometimes we have to look at things in a different way to be able to experience them um, fully. And I really like that. I mean, sometimes we have to see things through a different lens. So you have the theme of brokenness that kind of comes into play a lot in this book. Um, and the last chapter, Horns of the Altar, she starts talking about animals who have been hurt, either like they have like toes off, or sharks with nicks on their fins, or whatever. And she talks about how like they keep going despite all of that. Like, the animals, they keep going, they keep fighting. Each of us have scars for things that we have to work through, whether that is emotional or physical scars. Like, we have those scars, and even animals can have emotional scars as well. Like, my friend Tori pointed out that dogs can get PTSD. Through all of that, we still need to keep fighting, and we still fight. We still go on. And that's kind of what nature is. Like, there's so many forces of nature that go against all of these animals and all of these plants and all of these bugs, but it still keeps going. And I think that's ultimately what she's trying to show in the book, one of the major themes. And I mean, when that hit me, I was like, whoa, I love this. Because nature is beautiful, it is grotesque, it is safe, and it's dangerous, it's quiet, and it's loud, and it is unbelievable. And I just want to leave you with this quote that comes near the end of the book from that chapter. It says, "I am afraid and nibbled survivor in a fallen world, and I am getting along. I am not washed and beautiful, in control of a shining world in which everything fits, but instead am wandering awed about on a splintered wreck I've come to care for, whose gnawed trees breathe a delicate air, whose bloodied and scarred creatures are my dearest companions, and whose beauty beats and shines not in its perfections, but overwhelming in spite of them." And I love that. This book had so many good lines, and so, like, the imagery in it was just beautiful. It really made me just want to sit out in nature and just watch things, which is why I decided to go out and film some parts of nature. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to really get some good footage, but that's the challenge I want to give to you guys. That this is the little part where you guys get to come in and do stuff. I want you, before the end of finals week, because this would be great catharsis, to go out and sit somewhere in nature for like a minute, or longer if you want, but at least a minute. Observe around you, observe what is going on around you. Even if there are like people around, like, observe that. Observe the trees, observe if there are squirrels, birds, whatever. Observe, and then write down what you've observed. And if you want to do research to add to that, like scientific research, do that too. But just be there, be a part of it. As writers, especially, observing the natural world is great. And Annie Dillard did that very wonderfully in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And I really enjoyed the book. So I recommend it. Y'all should read it. And yeah, you guys have a great rest of finals week. I love you, and I'll miss you guys because class will